Good morning, welcome back to SAS From Scratch. Today we're going to be looking at episode 5, which corresponds to chapter 5 in your prep guide. And this one is all about identifying errors in your data, or your programs rather, which might be linked to errors in your data. And we're also going to be looking at two new statements. We're going to be looking at PUTLOG and PUT, which are very useful for basically writing out helpful records to the log or to the results tab. And so we'll talk about how we're going to do that. We're going to talk about what the difference is between put and PUTLOG as well. However, before we get there, we need to cover an error in the previous episode. So in episode 4, it was around the 1 hour 20 mark, I think. I left a comment on the episode 4 page as well. So what I said wrongly there was because the output statement never reached a certain variable. That's why that variable will never be written out. And the only reason why it happened was because we kept stepping through a data step and we kept having a variable in the PDV. That's completely wrong. I don't know why I said that. Probably because I record these episodes fairly early on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. But just to drive the point home, if we create a quick and dirty data set, let's call it basic info. We put in a name, we put in an age. Let's make it 105, that's how old I feel. We force that to be output, and then we do something like car equals Ford, whatever. And so what should happen here is we're not reading in any extra data set. So what we are doing is we're telling SAS to load these variables into the PDV. And so when SAS steps through this program, SAS is going to initialize the PDV for name, for age, for car. It's going to set all those to missing because that's the variables that it's picked up on in here. Excuse me. However, it will be able to output Jan and 105 because there's an output statement there. So we've removed the explicit output statement that would be here. We've moved it up here, so we override the implicit one with our explicit one. So if we run this, we get name Jan, age 105, and car is missing. So even though there's only a single record, even though output never reaches there, car is still initialized by the PDV. So sorry about that. Again, don't know why I said it. But that's the basics of the PDV view. While I'm here, let's save this into the episode 5 folder, just so that we have a program we can work with, because we will be asked to write some stuff later. Okay, just to recap again from the slides, they're always initialized by the PDV, the variables, even though an output statement doesn't reach them. So whether or not their value is written out depends on the placement of the output statement, but the variable itself will still be initialized as missing by the PDV. And so the reason why the errata is so appropriate today is because we're going to be talking about errors. There's two types of errors that we look at. The first is syntax errors, the second is semantic errors. So for syntax errors, that means your program does not conform to the language rules. It cannot compile, it cannot be interpreted. You'll essentially get an error in the log that says you've made a mistake. So maybe you have maybe you've misspelled a keyword and SAS has no idea what you're talking about. or you've left out a semicolon and SAS cannot interpret the program. So if you're coming from a computer science background as well, it's important to just put that out there. SAS doesn't compile its programs; it interprets them. If you compile a program, that essentially means that you have a program that can stand alone and be executed by the operating system, which is not what we have for SAS. We always need the SAS system to interpret the SAS programs. So the second type of error we're going to be looking at is semantic errors. So these are these are errors that don't throw a spanner into the works at compile time or interpreting time. They do sorry, they essentially crop up during runtime. So if you're if you've made, for example, a logical error, maybe you used a plus instead of, for example, a comma to separate certain things. So maybe I think the example that they give in the prep guide is if you're trying to calculate the average, but then what you do is, instead of passing to the mean function, person 1's weight, comma, person 2's weight, and comma, person 3's weight. If you'd say person 1 plus person 2 plus person 3, you're going to get, arguably something, let's say, in the 200 kilogram range or close to 200 kilos. And when you pass only that single value to SAS, it's just going to return that 200 kilogram value back to you. Whereas if you put commas in there, it would have properly calculated the average. That's one example, for example, of a semantic error. Something else that that could happen is if you've got arrays, for example, or you've got we'll talk about do loops at some point. Maybe you've got a missing start or end point in your data, so the do loop can't find the 2 points that it should iterate in between. So I mean, your do loop is correct, and saying do something from this point to this point, that's all correct. But then depending on what goes in, there could be something else that's wrong. So a good rule of thumb is that your syntax errors usually happen at compile or at interpreting time, and your semantic errors occur at runtime. You will be asked in the SAS base exam to identify certain errors. They can give you a piece of code that for the most part is correct. Maybe it's missing a semicolon somewhere, maybe a keyword has been misspelled, and you should have all of the necessary knowledge to be able to fix that. There's 2 variables in the PDV that we've not talked about before. These are always there. They are basically invisible to you, but you can see them if for example you put them to the log, or you can even link a different variable to them. And so let's look at an example of that, because I think it's useful. So let's start just simply by saying my fish, and we've seen this a few times now. We're just going to read in the SAS help.fish dataset. So if we run this, we get our fish dataset. I'm going to close these columns because we don't need them at the moment. And if we try and refer to the n and error variable, so let's call it my n equals n, and that can be capitalized or not. Again, SAS doesn't care. Or we can say my error equals error. And if we run this, we now see these 2 extra variables in our myfish dataset. So you'll notice that n here corresponds to the number of times that the data step has iterated. So how many times has it read something in from the SAS help.fish dataset. So in this case, your number here on the left hand side, that row number and this n number are going to correspond. No errors have occurred at any point here, so this my error column is 0 throughout. So if an error did occur, it would be set to 1. Apologies. If an error did occur, that column would be set to 1. If an error did not occur, that column is set to 0. And we can scroll through quickly, and there shouldn't be any errors here because it's a clean data set. We'll look at how we can look at these two as well with the put and PUTLOG statements. But just be aware, they're always there in the PDV. They're always created automatically, and you can refer to them and look at them as well. Okay, I think that's it for the types of errors. Common errors, we kind of spoke about this as well already, but missing semicolons, that's a big one. That happens a lot. I still do it sometimes. I think probably the reason for that is that occasionally I work in R, occasionally I maybe work in Python, and if you're not used to putting semicolons after you've worked with things there for a while and you come back to SAS, you tend to forget it. But that's probably one of the most common errors that people make. You could have missing statements. For example, maybe you've started a do block, and we'll look at do blocks in a subsequent session, but maybe you've started with a do block but you didn't pair it with an end block to close it out. That will give you an error. The use of incorrect keywords or the misspelling of keywords, we've talked about that, and the use of incorrect options or the misspelling of options, pretty much the same thing. So that's all common errors that happen. That's something that you will be tested on in the base exam, and please go through chapter 5 in the prep guide and check all of the examples that they give there. It's very useful to look at because again this will pop up. Then we're going to start looking at the PUTLOG statement. Now the PUTLOG statement essentially puts things to the log. You can put a few things to the log. So for example, a string, specific variables from the data set. You can look at your automatic variables like n or error, and we'll also look at the all keyword. So let's start with that. Now this actually will be in the, I put in some exercises as well. So let's maybe compare PUTLOG with PUT, and then we can look at all of this again. So just to reiterate this bit, when we're putting something to the log, or even with the put statement, we can put a custom string, we can put specific variables from the data set, and we can refer to these automatic variables. The same holds true for the put statement. And so the put statement is simply put, whereas PUTLOG obviously had the log bit appended to it. The rules are the same, but PUTLOG will only go to the SAS log, always. Whereas with put, that can go to different places. By default, it's the log, I believe. But you can have it right out to the results tab. You can have it right out to a file. You can write things out over a TCP socket. You can write things over FTP. So it's very useful if you also want to be able to write things to a remote storage space, or even to disk, or as it might be. So what we're going to look at today, we're not going to bother with TCP sockets. We're not going to bother with FTP and files and all that. We're simply going to look at two statements, and these two statements are valid only in your data step. You can't put them outside your data step. They have to be inside your data step. And that's file log and file print. And that's only applicable to the put statement, because put log will always go to the log. So file log tells SAS that you want whatever you put to go into the log. That should be the default. File print tells SAS that wherever your output is going. So if you've got, for example, a statistical procedure like a proc fric or a proc means, those results usually go into the results tab. And so you're telling SAS that where those results are being printed, you want your put statements to be printed as well. And so let's get to the exercise, because we'll put all of what we've learned into action. And that'll about wrap it up for today as well. So chapter 5 is a really nice short chapter, something we can go through quickly, but extremely useful. Again, make no mistake, the put and put log statements only become more useful as you become more comfortable with SAS. So exercise 5.1. Luckily, we've already started with it, so we've read in the SAS help.fish dataset. And our first instruction is to write a note to the log if any of the weights are missing. So if you would like to pause the video here and then try this exercise for yourself, that's perfectly fine. I think that's a better idea of doing it. As I've always said, if you look at somebody else, doing SAS, you're going to get very good at looking at people doing SAS. To actually get good at it yourself, you have to do it yourself. So let's do the first one. Write a note to the log if any weights are missing. And so here we can learn a little bit more about SAS as well. We can learn in the way that SAS handles missing values. Now, if you're coming from R, something you'll see a lot is obviously NA, and this is now the R syntax, so let me put it somewhere else. So in R, you would say something like if is.NA weight, then do something. Or if you're using, I think you don't even have the then keyword, right? So the one I use most often would be the dplyr option, which is just in your mutate statement. You'd have something like is NA weight. If it's NA, then do something, set it to something, whatever. Otherwise, just use the weight value as it is. So the equivalent to is.NA in SAS would be the missing keyword. So we would say if if missing weight, then do something. You could also do the following, because missings are by default mapped to a dot in SAS. So you could say if weight equals a dot, then do something. However, the reason why this is safer is because it will just handle your character as well as your numeric variables. This one, I believe, handles only your numeric variables. So if your characters are never truly missing, I think they're just empty, they're just blank. But so this keyword will pick up on that, whether it's character or numeric. So better to use this one in my opinion. Let me just see what our instruction was again. I'm going to click over. Write a note to the log if any weights are missing. Okay, so we know that if we wanted to write a note to the log, we would just use the put log statement. So we can say put log missing weight for fish, and let's say in addition to that, let's just list all the variables. So we're going to use this all keyword that we have. Okay, so let's run this. And let's go to our log. And we see the usual suspects here. We've got our code that we ran. We've got our notes with all of the stats of how long it took and how much memory it used. And then we've got this extra note here. So we can see that we've got a missing weight for fish, and we can go and fix this. We just need to put in an extra space in our character string. Species bream. We can see weight is a dot. As we've said, that means missing. There's the other lengths. There's the height. We've got a width. And here, because we included underscore or underscore, we've instructed SAS that whatever is in the PDV needs to be put to the log as well. And here we can see we've got our error variable, which is 0. No error has occurred in this record. And we've got n, which is 14. And we know from what we've been doing here that this is going to basically correspond directly to the row number. So let's go and look at record 14 in our output data, which is here. And we can see there's the missing weight. Now, we've only got 159 records in this data set. It's easy for us to sort of click through and look. If we had 10,000 records in this data set, it would be good that we can come to the log and see how many specific notes we wrote out. And because we've now done this, we know that within these 159 observations, there's only a single one where the weight is missing. The only thing I want to do now is to put a space in here so that it reads better. Let's go back to our log. Missing weight for fish, space, species equals blah blah blah. You can put a colon in here. You can put whatever you want in there to make it more readable. We could decide to be a bit more fancy. So we could say something like, if we just wanted to refer to the variable where that's missing, for example. So we can say n equals and species equals, for example. If we run this, we will get missing weight for fish, n equals 14, species equals bream. And so that's because we only put these two variables here in the PUTLOG statement, which is running from here to here. You could try and be even more fancy about it. So you could say, let's do something like this. If you leave out the equal sign and only refer to the column name, then that will get only the value without the name. So you could do something like this, and this should work. So missing weight 4, and then it's just going to go fetch the value of the species column at record, and it's just going to go fetch the value of the automatic n variable. And so if we look at our log now, we can see a nicer note even that says missing weight for bream at record 14. And so that's because we've left out the equal signs. Sometimes, usually if you're under pressure, you don't want to sit and bother too much with all of this. So it's easier to just put out the variables that you absolutely need, put in equal signs so that you know what you're looking at. If you've got time, if you want to be fancy, you can construct a nice sentence around this as well. So anyway, we've put that to the log. I think we've completed the first instruction. Okay, now our second instruction is write a note to the results tab if any weights are missing. Now what do we know? If we want to get out of the log tab and into the results tab, we need to use a put statement. So let's comment this out, and we're not going to bother with it. But let's start over here and say if missing weight, then put missing weight for species equals n equals, and this is how I prefer to do it most of the time. However, we did not specify where this put should go, so by default we should still see this in the log. Let's test that. Results are empty. In our log we see missing weight for species bream, n equals 14. If we wanted to make sure that went to the results tab, we would execute this statement that says file print, and that basically means that we want our put statements to go to the results tab. And again, this is only valid within the data step. So you can't go and put it this line here at the top outside of your data step. And now if we run this, we get a nice little note in our results tab that says missing weight for species bream, where n equals 14. And it's as simple as that. So if you had something linked here to maybe a file on disk, or you had something linked to I don't know, over a TCP IP socket or an FTP location, then this could have been written out somewhere else, somewhere remotely. For now, we're just putting it in our results tab, and just to be perfectly clear, I don't even think this, I'm not even sure if this is on the exam. The stuff about TCP IP and FTP, they're not going to ask you to do that in the exam. Good to be aware of it, good to know that it's there, but that's outside of the scope. Okay, let's go to the fourth instruction. Try to prefix your note, our custom little note, with warning or error. What happens? Let's do that. Let's go back to the put log statement. And let's say here, warning, missing weight for this species. I really prefer just having it as this. It reads a lot easier for me. Missing weight for species, n equals, and error equals. Let's also look at our error, our default automatic error variable. Warning. That was our first instruction. Okay, let's run this. Immediately, we see that we've got a yellow caution sign here in our log. If we go and look at our log, we'll see this has been automatically highlighted as well. And it now says missing weight for species bream, etc., etc. Error equals 0. And so what SAS is picking up here is if this warning keyword is in the log, SAS will highlight it, and it will notify you here with a little icon, and also here in these notes, that you have a warning in your log. Now again, the reason why this is so important is because a good SAS program is free from warnings and free from errors completely. That shouldn't be in there. If you've got a warning or an error, that means something is wrong. That's something that you have to go and fix. It's not something that can be ignored. I've sometimes noticed working with R that a lot of the time some of the custom packages and things will just sometimes put out a warning that's not really significant or all that important for you to care about. However, when you're working with SAS, every warning and every error is important and should be cleaned up. Let's change this to an error and see what happens. And I think that was one of the instructions as well. Let's quickly look here. Let's go back. Examine the error variable and explain the difference between error and what's happening in your log file. Let's do that. Let's run this. Note that we've now changed warning to error. And oh, sorry, what happened here was that I highlighted this and it only ran that bit when I clicked the run button. So let's just start over. Okay, here's our data set. We can see there's a red error icon here, which means that the SAS log has encountered an error. And because there is an error keyword here in the log, SAS automatically highlights it as red, puts the icon here, and adds it here to the little summary at the top as well. However, note here that error is 0, and the reason for that is that the putting an error into the log does not actually mean that the program data vector in its processing of the data step encountered an error. So it's not a true error, which is why error is still set to 0. The SAS log picks up on the keyword, colors it, highlights it for us, but the fact that the weight is missing is not an error. If it were, then we would have seen an error the first time we simply just read in the SAS help.fish dataset. So if that missing value was a problem, the PDV would have complained about it long ago. So we're putting something into the log that is not strictly a true error, but it helps us notice it. And this is quite useful because you can put lots of notes. I sometimes, for myself, if I'm programming, I'll put my initials into the log, and then I can go and search for my initials later, and I'll have some helpful notes for myself in my programs. However, if there's something that's important that somebody should go and look for, maybe when I'm not there and they have to take over my program, I would probably change this to a warning, so that they can come and look at this, so that if they run the program and if weight was very important to maybe our statistical model or something else, then as soon as something is missing, we want that to be highlighted so it can be queried. So that's normally what I would do if something was very important. And if you've got systems at work that maybe you've got some helper programs or production systems that look for this in programs, this can cause issues. You can, they might look through the log and see this bit that says warning. Even if there was no missing weight, this bit would still be in the program and just won't go to the log. It'll go to the log like this to say this is what was executed, but it won't actually put this note into the log, if this makes sense. And so if you've got production systems at work that maybe try and help you look for warnings, they'll pick up on this bit because they'll simply look for this keyword as well. And so the way you can go around that is you can do something like this, which if a system comes and only reads it this bit, it won't see a warning keyword. Whereas if you execute it, and SAS puts these two bits together, you then get an actual warning keyword. So it'll just concatenate these two bits. Let's not worry about that too much for now. It's not that important. It's just something useful to know. Something we did not talk about, and I only put it here in the last question to compare the put and put log statements with the error statement. You can force this error variable to 1 in a case like this. So if we change from put log to error, it will force this error variable to 1 in the PDV. So even though missing weight isn't an error, it'll flag it as an error. And if we run this, we get missing weight. Why is it printing everything now? Species bream error equals 1. Nah, whatever. I'll check this later. This is not too important, but what I'm trying to demonstrate is that if you've got an error statement, that forces your error value in the PDV to 1. The important thing to just keep in mind here is that, again, this is not a true error, and this is again different from the log. So you can see in the log that nothing actually got highlighted here. We didn't see a red icon, none of that. If we wanted to do that, we would still have to put the error keyword in front. We can run this again, and if we go and look at the log, we see missing weight for species bream, N14 error 1, and we've got a red highlighted error keyword, and it's in our summary as well. So that's how you would force that error that automatic variable to 1. Not the most useful thing, at least in my day-to-day work. The the put and put log statements are a lot more useful. Usually not a good idea to even if it's something you want people to pay attention to, it's usually not a good idea to flag it as an error. Rather flag it as a warning with a put or a put log statement. But just so you're aware, it can be done if you really want to. Again, not something that I use on a regular basis. I saw they covered the keyword in the prep guide. I don't think this is too important to worry about. Just be aware that it exists, and it essentially replaces the put or put log statements. That's it for today. That's it for chapter 5. It was a nice, quick and easy one. Next time we are going to be a little bit more busy. We've got to look at proc print, which is a very basic way of taking things, outputting things into the results tab. We are going to look at proc sort. We've already seen proc sort in action in some of the previous episodes, but we'll spend a little bit more time on it. We'll see what happens maybe if we leave out, for example, the data keyword or the data option or the out option, and we'll see what happens. We'll have our very first look at by groups. We've done so already because we've worked with a by statement in proc sort. We're going to look at it in the context of proc print as well. But this is still the basics, so we're not gonna do too much with the by statement. We're gonna look at the label statement. I think I might have briefly covered it in one of the previous episodes, but we'll pay a little bit more attention to it in the next episode. And then we're gonna look at titles and footnotes. They're also important for your results tab, or if you're outputting things to a file, whether that's maybe a Word document or a PDF document. Whatever it might be. So that's it for next time. It'll be a bit longer than today's episode, which hopefully is not too long. I don't always keep track of how long I ramble and waffle, but thank you very much for sticking with me. And I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was useful. Feel free to leave me a comment down below if I got anything else wrong, like I did in the last episode. As I said in episode 1, I get lots of stuff wrong on a day-to-day basis, even though I've worked with SAS for many years. That's it. That's chapter 5. Thank you for watching. Have a good rest of your day, and feel free to like and subscribe and leave a comment as well. Okay, cheers. Bye bye.